They say the wind remembers. Beneath the ancient baobab trees, where roots reach as deep into the earth as branches stretch into the sky, the griots still gather. Their voices are raspy with age, but their tongues are sharp with story. Children gather around them, eyes wide, while mothers hushed babies with the rhythm of old songs. Embers crackle in the center of the circle, casting shadows that dance like spirits listening from the other side. It always begins the same way. The old man taps his staff on the ground, a drumbeat made of dust and time. His voice rises like smoke. Long ago, before our grandmothers' grandmothers knew their names, the wind carried a song not its own. It moved through the tall grass like a whisper. It tickled the ears of elephants and lifted the hearts of hunters. It curled into cooking fires, kissed the cheeks of crying children, and made warriors lower their spears. The children lean closer. The fire pops. Whose voice rides the wind even now? The griot asks, pausing, looking past the circle into the endless dusk. No one answers. They know better. That question is not for them. That question is for the wind. Out on the savannah the air shifts. It begins as a sigh between the trees, then grows into a low humming that rustles the dry leaves like fingers on a drum. The animals stir. Antelopes twitch their ears, birds fluff their feathers. There is something in that wind. Something more than dust and heat. Something like memory. Something like morning. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, if you stop your breath and listen with your bones, you'll hear it, a voice. Sweet, set, strong. A melody woven of longing and love, echoing like it belongs to the earth itself. The old ones say the voice belongs to a girl whose name was once carved into the bark of every tree and whispered into the heart of every drum. They say her voice was so beautiful that even the gods grew still to hear it. But humans, as always, feared what they did not understand. And so they did what humans always do to what is divine. They tried to silence it. But the wind is no man's servant. It heard her final note and it has carried it ever since, over mountains, through deserts, across rivers that know no name. It does not forget. Tonight, the griot's eyes glimmer in the firelight. He leans forward, voice now a hush, almost a prayer. Some songs are too strong to die. Some voices too wild to chain. Hers was one of them. And though she was made mute by those who feared her, the wind refused to let her be forgotten. Outside the village, the wind picks up again, singing her name without words, echoing through time. And so, the story begins. Nia was born on a night when the rains refused to come, and the sky cracked with lightning that danced without thunder. The midwife, a stooped old woman with palms like woven leather, said she'd never heard a quieter birth. Not a cry. Not a gasp. Just wide eyes, black as fresh soil, blinking at the world as if she'd already known it in a dream. But the silence did not last long. It was the next morning, as the sun pushed its golden fingers over the hills, that Nia first sang. She did not speak her first word or coo as other babies did. Instead, she let out a single drawn-out hum, a sound so soft and pure that it seemed to ripple through the very air. The chickens outside stopped pecking. The goats lifted their heads. Her mother, exhausted and barely upright, began to cry. Not because the sound was loud or alarming, but because it felt like water being poured into a cracked pot, cool, clean, and necessary. By the time Nia was 3, her songs had already become a part of village life. At dawn, she would sit beneath the mango tree near her family's compound and sing. Her voice did not have words in it, not in the way people spoke. It carried tones that slipped through cracks in the heart, sounds that soothed tired muscles and washed over the spirit like fresh river water. When she sang, even the elders, proud, unyielding men and women who had lived through drought, famine, and war, closed their eyes and remembered laughter. Her mother called it the voice of water, not because it was wet or weepy, but because it flowed, it healed, it made things grow. The animals loved her first. Birds would perch in her hair while she sang. Dogs followed her through the marketplace, wagging tails like metronomes. Once, a leopard strayed into the village, its eyes yellow with hunger. Panic surged, children were gathered, spears were drawn, but then Nia stepped forward and sang. The leopard stood still as a carving. It blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared into the brush, tail swaying like a reed in the wind. Then the people began to see the miracles. When old Mama Teeb collapsed with fever, no herb or charm could bring down the heat. But Nia sang beside her all night, her voice rising and falling like the tides, and by morning the fever was gone. When the rains failed again and the soil cracked open in thirst, Nia stood alone at the edge of the fields and sang to the clouds. The next day the skies opened. Not a storm, nothing violent, but a steady, sweet rain that made the millet dance and the maize smile. The warriors were the last to yield. In a village where strength was still measured by how high one could lift a spear or how many scars lined one's chest, a girl's voice was not meant to hold power. But power cares little for permission. During one skirmish with a rival clan, as blades clanged and men shouted, Nia appeared on the hill overlooking the battlefield. She sang one note, just one. The sound curled into the wind and wrapped itself around every heart in the valley. Blades lowered. Breathing slowed. And before anyone knew why, the fighting stopped. Some wept. Others just walked away as if waking from a dream. From that day, even the fiercest warriors nodded with respect when she passed. At first, the village rejoiced in Nia's gift. She was their treasure, their wonder. Mothers asked her to bless newborns with her voice. Farmers invited her to sing over seeds before planting. When someone fell ill, they came to Nia before the healer. People built benches under trees just to listen to her. Her songs were collected, mimicked, sung back in broken form by children playing in the dust. But as with all things too beautiful, her gift could not remain a secret. Word of Nia's voice slipped beyond the boundaries of the village. Traders passing through told stories around distant fires. A songbird girl, they called her. A voice like the river's prayer. And so they came, strangers from beyond the hills, from across dry plains and thick forests. Some came in hope, bringing sick children wrapped in cloth. Others came in greed, eyes glittering with the thought of power they might harness or sell. They brought gifts, woven cloth, carved beads, fat goats, even gold. All they asked was to hear her sing. And Nia, still just a girl, gave her gift freely. Not for the trinkets or praise, but because the singing made her feel alive, made the world feel right. Her songs were not something she did, they were who she was. When she sang, it was as if she touched the thread that connected all living things, plant to animal, sky to soil, breath to spirit. But not everyone saw her as a blessing. Some whispered in corners that her gift was unnatural, that no human voice should tame beasts or call rain, that she was a spirit child, perhaps even a danger. They watched as crowds gathered around her. They noticed how people listened more to her songs than to the village elders. And jealousy, that oldest root of poison, began to spread quietly beneath the surface. Still, Nia remained unaware. She sang because it brought her joy, because it made others smile, because it seemed like the only honest thing in a world full of noise. She had never known a world without her voice. She could not yet imagine a world in which she would be denied it. But the wind knew. The wind that carried her songs from village to mountain, from forest to desert, it felt the shift. It rustled uneasily through the trees, stirring the dust like a warning. Trouble was coming. And Nia's voice, the voice of water, would soon be tested in a way no melody had ever been tested before. Far beyond Nia's quiet valley, past sun-bleached plains and crocodile-laced rivers, sat the kingdom of Oloran, where King Abadil ruled from a palace carved into red stone and polished with centuries of wealth. His word was law, and his gaze was feared more than any sword. For years, his rule had gone uncontested, wrapped in the pomp of tradition and the silence of submission. The people bowed, the warriors saluted, and the bards sang only what he allowed them to remember. But lately the wind had changed. It arrived first as rumor, idle talk carried by passing merchants and dusty travelers. A girl, they said, in a valley none could name with certainty. Her voice brought rain to cracked fields. Her songs could quiet storms and move animals as if they were reeds in a river. Mothers whispered that her lullabies brought their sick children back from death's edge. Warriors claimed they'd laid down their blades not in defeat, but in reverence, when her melody struck the air like sunlight through cloud. At first, Abadil dismissed it. The stories were fanciful, exaggerated as all folktales were. What harm could a village girl do to a king surrounded by armies and gods carved in gold? But the tales grew louder. Even his most trusted advisors spoke of Nia now, not just with curiosity but with wonder. Songs sung in her style began echoing through marketplaces. The people hummed her melodies beneath their breath, unaware they betrayed their hearts. The king felt something shift, something unseen but undeniable. The kind of shift that precedes revolts, revolutions, or revelations. Still, Abadil might have left it alone had it not been for the queen. Queen Aiden was once a priestess of the Order of Silence, a secretive sect that taught that the greatest power lies not in speech but in restraint. To her, words were dangerous things and voices, especially beautiful ones, were veils that clouded the truth. Her rituals were performed in stillness, her prayers offered through gesture and gaze. When she heard of Nia, she did not see a miracle. She saw a threat. She does not rule, she told the king one night, her voice like a snake slipping through sand. She sings and yet the people follow her. That is unnatural. That is dangerous. Abadil poured palm wine into a clay cup, eyes heavy with concern. She is a girl. She is more, Aiden replied, tone flat as stone. Unless, a girl who sings with the power of a river? That is not a gift. That is an imbalance. The royal priests, keepers of old prophecies and darker truths, were summoned. When they spoke, it was in riddles and fragments, always forcing the king to hunt for the meaning like a jackal tracking blood. The world is made of voice, said one, eyes clouded with age. And silence. One holds power, the other holds peace. If a voice rises too high, it draws the eyes of old things. Of forgotten gods. A voice that moves nature must be stilled, said another. Or it will awaken gods who no longer remember mercy. These words haunted Abadil more than he dared admit. His ancestors had carved their kingdom from a time of chaos, when storms had minds and rivers demanded tribute. He had no desire to call back such days. He began to see Nia not just as a girl with a gift, but as a fracture in the careful balance of his rule. If the people listened to her, truly listened, they might begin to question everything else. But kings must be careful. If he had her killed, she would become a martyr. If he had her imprisoned, the wind itself might rise in protest. No, if she was to be silenced, it must be done subtly, quietly, as all the most dangerous things are. So the court conspired. A plan was born in whispers, shaped by envy and fear. They would not kill her, they would kill her reputation. They would let her voice continue only until the people turned against it. First, the royal poets would compose verses mocking her melodies, spreading the idea that her voice was a trick, a vanity. Then the healers would blame her when cures failed, saying she drew life only to steal it later. When crops withered or rains flooded, priests would point fingers her way. A campaign of shame planted like weeds among wheat. And if that failed, there were older methods. Forbidden spells kept locked behind temple doors. Rituals to bind the voice, to twist it inward until it could no longer reach the air. Queen Iden knew them all. She had used them once, long ago, when another priestess had dared to speak too boldly. She won't even know it is happening, she said softly, a cold smile pulling at her lips. And when she is finally silent, the people will thank you for it. Abadil said nothing. He only looked out across the horizon, where the wind had begun to stir the trees beyond the palace walls. He thought he heard something, a note, distant and clear, carried by the air. And for the first time in years the king felt afraid. They came for her at dawn, when the sky was still stained with the bruises of night. The birds had not yet stirred, and even the wind held its breath. Nia had felt it coming, not in words but in the quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but warns. A hush too heavy to be natural. She sat beneath the mango tree as she had every morning since childhood, ready to sing the world awake. But the earth itself seemed to lean away from her, as if it already knew what was coming. The royal guards approached in silence, their crimson cloaks trailing behind them like tongues of fire. At their front rode a man wrapped in leopard skin and gold medallions, the high messenger of King Abadil. His face was blank, carved of duty, but his eyes would not meet hers. Nia of the valley, he said, his voice formal and distant, you are summoned to the king's court under accusations of witchcraft and treason against nature. The words fell like stones. Witchcraft. Treason. Nia blinked but said nothing. She did not sing. Not then. A strange weight settled in her chest, cold, foreign, suffocating. Villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by the sound of boots against the earth. Some gasped, others looked away. No one stepped forward. The same mouths that once begged for her songs now remained closed. Fear had done what no enemy ever could. It had silenced the people more than any spell. Her mother ran through the gathering crowd, face streaked with sleep and dust. No, she cried, pushing through the guards. You cannot take her, she has done nothing but heal and help. The high messenger raised a hand and 2 guards stepped forward. They grabbed the woman by her arms, dragging her to the ground as she kicked and screamed. You will not harm her. She shrieked, fingernails clawing the air. She is not a curse, she is a blessing. The priestess in white stepped forward then, Queen Iden's emissary. Her face was serene, her voice wrapped in practiced calm. A voice that alters the course of nature is not of this world, she intoned. It must be returned to silence where it came from. This is the will of the gods. Nia was bound in soft cords laced with crushed sedge and powdered root, a mixture designed not to restrain the body but the spirit. Her limbs grew heavy. Her breath felt borrowed. Still she did not resist. Somewhere deep inside she knew resistance would only feed their fear. They brought her to the Temple of Silence, an ancient structure carved into the stone cliffs beyond the capital. It was a place older than the kingdom itself, whispered to be a prison for voices too dangerous to live. The chamber was circular, open to the sky, with smooth obsidian walls that echoed not with sound but with memory. Here many had been silenced before, but none as loved, none as luminous as Nia. The ritual of muting had not been performed in generations. Even the elders trembled as they prepared the herbs and ash. The ingredients were sacred and feared: dried petals from the nightshade lily, bones ground for mute birds, and the sap of the whispering fig tree. These were burned into a thick smoke, filling the chamber with a scent that felt like morning. Nia was placed at the center, her eyes wide but dry. She did not struggle. Her mouth, once the source of so much joy and peace, remained closed. But inside her a fire flickered. Not of anger or fear, but of sorrow vast and deep. The chief elder stepped forward, palm coated in ash, and pressed it gently to her throat. "By the will of the gods," he said, voice trembling, "we return this voice to the silence." They chanted then, not in rhythm, not in beauty, but in raw power. Ancient words meant to undo what had once been gifted. The herbs were burned at her feet, the smoke rising around her like a shroud. Nia opened her mouth. She screamed. But no sound came. Her face contorted, her body convulsed, her lungs emptied, but nothing escaped. It was as though the world itself had turned its back. Her scream echoed only inside her, a blade without a target, a storm without rain. The pain was not physical, it was existential. As though her soul were being scraped clean, her essence unraveled thread by thread. Her voice had never been a thing she used. It had been her heartbeat, her memory, her way of being. And now it was being pulled from her, not stolen but erased. Her mother broke through the guards at the edge of the chamber, barefoot and bleeding, eyes wild with fury. "Stop this madness," she yelled. "You're killing her." But the guards dragged her back before she reached the center. Her voice cracked as she fought, and then faded into silence as she was cast from the temple steps, her sobs swallowed by the wind. And then it happened. In the final moment, as the last ash touched Nia's lips, her body surged with something no spell could bind. With every piece of will she had left, she drew one final breath. Not with her lungs, but from the deepest place within her, the space between sorrow and hope. And she sang. A single note. Pure. Crystalline. Shaped not by tongue or mouth but by truth. It rose like light from water, cut through the chanting, pierced the ceiling of the chamber and the clouds beyond. The sound shimmered, brief but eternal, and the temple itself groaned in response. Cracks split the stone walls. Dust rained down. The air trembled. And then silence. True silence. Nia collapsed. Her mouth opened once more but no sound emerged. Her voice was gone. The elders stepped back, horrified but victorious. The ritual was complete. The voice had been silenced. Or so they believed. But the wind that rushed through the temple afterward carried a strange tone. A lingering echo. A memory wrapped in breeze. Her song had escaped. And it would never forget her. The morning they cast her out, the sky was clear as though nothing had happened. The same sky that once shimmered in time with Nia's melodies now stretched above her in a cold, unfeeling blue. The villagers did not gather. There was no ceremony. No mourning. Just a trail of dust behind the guards who left her at the boundary where the grasslands curled into the ancient edges of the whispering forest. The forest was a place of exile and myth, a tangle of green said to be alive with spirits and animals that remembered older gods. Children were warned never to enter. It was said the trees had voices, that the wind there whispered not just through leaves but through time. Nia stood at the forest's mouth, small and silent, barefoot and alone. She turned once, hoping for a glimpse of her mother, for a final farewell, but the horizon was empty. Her lips moved in a silent question. Why? But the words had no wings. Her voice was gone. Only memory answered. She stepped into the forest. The whispering forest did not welcome or reject her. It simply observed. The air was cooler here, filtered through thick canopies. Vines draped like necklaces, and the ground was carpeted in moss and old leaves. Sounds were different. Not loud but layered, rustling, chirping, breathing. Everything here was alive and everything watched. At first, Nia moved like a shadow. She made no fire, fearing to call attention to herself. She gathered fruit and roots, slept in the hollows of trees. Hunger gnawed at her. Her hands, once used for dancing as she sang, now tore bark and dug in soil. Her feet blistered. She cried in silence. But slowly the forest began to respond. The animals came first. A family of wind birds, a rare species with feathers that shimmered like morning mist, fluttered down beside her one twilight. They didn't startle when she moved. One even perched on her shoulder, cocking its head as though listening to a song that still hung around her like mist. These birds, known in legend to ride the wind and sing in whistled tones only spirits could hear, became her companions. They nested near her, brought her seeds and twigs, and watched as she moved, always silently, through the trees. She began to hum, not aloud but in her mind. Melodies built from memory. Soft, curling tones that she traced with her breath even though they made no sound. Her fingers tapped them out on bark and stone, each pattern a remembrance of a song once sung. She sang with the rhythm of her hands. She hummed with the flutter of her lashes. She danced with her footsteps across leaves. At night, she lay beneath the canopy, and though no voice escaped her lips, she imagined singing to the moon. Each imagined note pulsed through her chest. Sometimes she could almost feel them vibrating through the trees. The wind birds noticed. They began to mimic the rhythm she tapped, the cadence of her breath, the hums only her heart could hear. They whistled back what her silence had tried to erase. Her invisible melodies began to live again, first in fragments, then in flight. One evening, a bird flew high above the trees and let out a trill so hauntingly familiar that Nia froze. It was hers. Her song. A broken phrase of it, maybe, but unmistakable. And something answered. Far away across the savannah, the wind picked up. Not sharp, not fierce, but curious. It slipped between branches and swirled around her ankles. It rustled the hair that fell like rivers down her back. It listened. Nia closed her eyes and placed a palm to her chest. She pressed her other hand against the trunk of the tree beside her and began to tap again. Her rhythm, slow and deliberate, became a message. I am here. Tap, tap, tap. I remember. Tap, tap. The wind moved. Not like any breeze she had felt before, it spiraled around her body in a delicate spiral, stirring her clothing, brushing her cheeks, playing with the ends of her hair like an old friend. It circled once, twice, then shot upward, carrying with it the calls of the wind birds. Carrying her humming. Out of the forest, across the savannah, toward the valley that had turned its back on her. The forest too responded. Branches swayed though no breeze touched them. Leaves trembled with no cause. A chorus of rustling grew, subtle but harmonious. Nia stood among the trees, hands pressed to bark, eyes lifted to the sky. No one else might have heard it, but she did. It was her voice. Not in sound but in echo. In memory. In rhythm. The forest had become her choir. The wind her messenger. She was not voiceless. Only changed. And though the world had tried to bury her song, it now found new life, not through her mouth, but through every living thing that had once heard it. Through birds. Through trees. Through the listening wind. She stepped deeper into the forest, no longer as an exile but as something new. A girl with no voice, but a song that refused to die. It began as a whisper, thin as thread, winding through the millet fields of a parched village in the southern plains. No one noticed it at first, not really. After all, wind had always passed through the land. But this wind moved differently. It came not with force but with purpose. It moved like it knew something, like it carried something precious, something remembered. One day the villagers awoke to find their fields, so long starved of rain, covered in dew. The soil, once dry as bone, now smelled sweet and alive. Shoots of green pushed timidly through cracked earth. The village priest, a man more accustomed to prayers than miracles, stood barefoot in the fields with arms raised to the sky, unsure whether to cry or sing. That night, children in the village tossed in sleep, murmuring strange words as they dreamed. When they awoke, their mouths were full of song, fragments of melody no one had taught them. A melody that felt ancient and new all at once. They sang of a woman wrapped in white leaves, who hummed as she walked between trees and whose voice had no source but filled the air like warmth. They didn't know the name but they knew the feeling. She is the wind, one child said, blinking in wonder. But also a girl. The villagers whispered. And the wind carried those whispers further. In the highlands of Isoba, where fires were used to fend off chill winds and song had long disappeared from the lips of farmers, shepherds began to notice something strange. As they walked through narrow passes, the wind that whipped through the rocks sometimes sang to them. Not like the wind's usual howl or whistle, but like a voice carried inside it. Feminine. Wordless. Alive. They called it Emioro, the spirit of the voice. One day an old griot named Baco, thin as a flute reed and wrapped in layers of patterned cloth, was passing through the edge of the savannah. He walked slowly, leaning on his carved staff, listening not just with ears but with his bones. He had heard many songs in his time, songs of war, of love, of kingdoms risen and fallen. But the song the wind carried that day stopped him mid-step. He turned slowly, eyes wide. The melody was delicate, almost shy. But layered in it were the rhythms of drumbeats, the call of birds, the hush of leaves. It was as if nature itself had composed it, but with a heart. No, with a soul. He followed the sound through the trees, letting the wind guide him. There was no girl to be found. Only a small clearing where wind birds fluttered and danced in the air like falling petals. The birds sang her melody, not exactly but close enough to pull tears from Bako's tired eyes. That night, he sat beneath a twisted acacia tree, the stars blinking like listening eyes, and began to compose. He called the piece, the voice of the wind girl. He played it first on his kora, letting the notes settle on the night like dew. Then he added words, simple but rich. She sang with no mouth, and the sky bent low to hear. She wept no tears, but rivers followed her steps. They silenced her. But now the wind sings her name. He sang this in the markets of distant towns. People stopped. Listened. Some cried, not knowing why. Others found themselves humming along before realizing they'd heard the melody before, in their dreams or drifting between trees, or carried on the lips of their children. The story grew. She had no name at first, only titles. The voice without sound. The girl who sang rain. She who hummed to the stars. But among the griots the story took a shape. And a name. Nia. They told of a girl from a quiet valley who healed with her voice, whose gift frightened kings, and whose silence only made her louder. Of a ritual meant to end her power, and how her last note cracked stone. Of how the wind took that note and made it eternal. The legend traveled faster than horses, carried not on scrolls or edicts but in song. Songs that reached into dreams. Songs that filled baskets with harvest. Songs that made mothers hum to sleeping babies and reminded the weary of peace. In a village near the river Obu, an old woman wove baskets to the rhythm of a melody she couldn't name. She said it kept her hands from trembling. In a town near the coast, fishermen claimed the sea calmed when they sang the Wind Girl's song before casting nets. In the hills of Ijub, where warriors once clashed for generations, rivals sat together beneath moonlight, sharing palm wine and verses of Nia's legend. The voice they tried to erase had become 1,000 voices. And the wind? It never stopped. It became her herald, her choir, her echo. It slipped through narrow alleys and wide open fields, through temples and taverns, singing not just about her, but as her. Because in losing her voice, Nia had become something greater than flesh and sound. She had become a presence, a question, a story that sang itself. Some say that on certain nights, if the moon is full and the trees are still, you can hear it clearly. A voice not from lips but from the leaves. Not from lungs but from longing. A song that stirs the air around your ribs and reminds you of something forgotten. And if you ask the wind, whose voice is this? It will answer. Nia's. The decline did not arrive with a trumpet or a blaze. It came quietly, like a breath held too long. First the rain ceased. Not abruptly but gradually, cruelly. The clouds still gathered, heavy and full, but they wept elsewhere. Far from the capital, far from the reach of King Abadil's hand. The royal fields yellowed. The river that once sang beneath the palace walls became a muttering stream, too weak to carry its own reflection. Animals thinned. Crops withered before the first harvest. Wells dried, and so did the people's patience. In the palace halls the air grew stale. The silk banners still hung, but the colors seemed drained from them. Laughter had long since disappeared. Even music, a fixture of the royal court, had vanished. The king, once vibrant and proud, sat silent at meals, his fingers twitching nervously at the table's edge. But it was the whispers that gnawed at him. At first, they were only rumors passed between servants, quiet hums in the back kitchens behind the drapery, near the temple gates. People spoke of a girl, once exiled, whose silence had awakened a storm. They sang snatches of a song no bard dared perform aloud, humming softly under breath as they walked barefoot through the markets. Soldiers heard it, and villagers sang it in fields under their breath. Even priests, once the protectors of the ritual of muting, began to feel their tongues itch with the desire to sing it. They called it the forbidden melody. Abadil raged in private. She was silenced, he told his advisors. Her voice is gone. But his words sounded hollow even to himself. In the dark of his chamber, the king began to dream of wind, not soothing but accusatory. It howled against his windows. It slipped through cracks in the stone, brushing past his ears like cold breath. And in its current he imagined he heard her voice, not screaming, not angry, singing. Soft, endless and unbroken. He ordered the palace griots to compose louder songs, more powerful anthems to drown it out. But none could compare. The wind seemed to sing against them, erasing each note before it could land. Then came the queen. Idun, once a priestess of silence, had grown thinner, more hollow, more restless. The hush she had once worshipped as sacred now clung to her like a curse. She walked the palace halls barefoot in the middle of the night, head bowed, hands shaking. Servants found her muttering to herself. She stared at mirrors and flinched when wind touched her neck. She sings in the silence, the queen whispered to no one in particular. She sings in the silence. In her dreams she heard the same melody every night. Not a voice exactly but the memory of one. She tried to block her ears. She prayed. She poured sacred ash over her robes and smeared her own lips with root sap to deaden her breath. But the song only grew louder in her mind. It echoed with mercy. And that was the worst of it. Not anger, not vengeance, but a forgiveness too vast to bear. Across the kingdom the humming became louder. Children sang it as they played with sticks. Old men whistled it while drawing water from shrinking wells. Mothers sang it softly while rocking hungry infants. Rebels used it as a signal. 3 notes hummed in rhythm to mark safe houses and secret meetings. When a prince from a neighboring kingdom visited, he was shocked to find guards at the city gates absent-mindedly tapping the melody on their spears. "What song is that?" he asked. They froze. One coughed. The other shrugged. "It's nothing," he lied. "Just an old tune. From the wind." And so the wind became dangerous. Abadil tried to stamp it out. He forbade all whistling. He banned griots from playing stringed instruments. He ordered patrols to arrest anyone caught humming. He even punished a mother for singing a lullaby too sweetly. But the more he silenced, the more the silence sang. The people had not forgotten Nia. The harder he clenched his fist around the kingdom, the more of it slipped through his fingers like sand. His court grew quieter not from order but from absence. Ministers fled. Priests disappeared. Some joined the rebels. Others simply vanished, chasing the melody to the edge of the whispering forest, where rumor said her presence still lingered. And through it all the wind did not stop. It rose through the corridors of the palace. It rattled the windows. It slipped under the doors of the royal chamber and wrapped itself around the king's throat, not choking, just reminding. Whose voice rides the wind? His sleep grew fractured. The dreams became unbearable. He had silenced a girl, but not her voice. Her song had outlived his command. It had become a part of the kingdom's breath. And now the kingdom itself was exhaling. The sky began to change days before the villagers noticed anything unusual. First, the stars grew brighter, pinpricks of gold etched across the dark velvet above. Then the moon took on a strange hue, soft as pearl, glowing with a faint shimmer that pulsed like a heartbeat. Griots whispered that the heavens were aligning, just as they had in ancient times, when spirits walked alongside mortals and the veil between worlds grew thin. In the whispering forest, Nia felt it first. The wind returned, not as breeze or gust but as an old friend, swirling around her with purpose. It circled her resting place, stirring the wind birds from their nests, bending the branches overhead. She looked up, eyes wide, feeling something vast stirring in the marrow of the trees. The wind carried voices now, familiar ones. Echoes of children singing, elders humming, rebels chanting in rhythm. Her melody, scattered like seeds across the land, had bloomed. And now the wind was bringing it back. It swirled around her in a spiral of song, weaving every voice, every breath, every whispered hum into a single living current. It didn't give her voice back, not to her throat. That would have been too small a gift. No. It gave her something greater. It made her song eternal. The forest burst into bloom. Flowers that had not opened in decades bloomed in seconds. Bright blues, deep reds, ghostly whites. Vines danced up tree trunks. Leaves shimmered like they'd been kissed by stars. Even the ground pulsed with soft light. Birds, beasts, and insects all turned toward her. And in their eyes, silent reverence. The forest itself sang. Not in words. Not in notes. But in the creak of bark, the rush of leaves, the flutter of feathered wings. Her song was now a presence, a current moving through all things. Nia stood at the center, not singing but being sung. And then quietly she walked. Through the trees, across the savannah, toward the village that once cast her out. She passed unnoticed at first. The villagers saw only the shimmering in the corner of their eyes, a strange stillness in the air. A hush that felt holy. Then someone looked again and saw her. A young girl in white. Hair coiled like wind-blown vines. Bare feet. Calm eyes. And behind her, the wind. Always the wind. It sang. As she stepped, flowers bloomed in her footprints, soft petals of blue and white, curling open with each step. Children gasped. Elders fell to their knees. Some wept. Others simply began to hum the song they knew, the song she had become. She passed the marketplace. The bakery. The square where they had once shouted accusations. No one stopped her. No one dared. When she reached the palace, the guards parted without a word. Inside, King Abadil sat in the throne room, surrounded by silence, not the rich, sacred kind but the empty, maddening kind. His eyes were wild, sunken. His lips moved constantly, whispering arguments to shadows. He had not slept in days. The wind would not let him. And now it sang in full. When Nia entered the chamber, he stood, trembling. She said nothing, could say nothing, but her presence struck him like thunder. The wind roared through the room, lifting dust, extinguishing torches, tearing rich tapestries from the walls. He clutched his ears, screaming at a voice only he could hear. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" he cried, falling to his knees. But the wind did not stop, nor did the song. Because it wasn't hers anymore, not solely. It belonged to the rivers, to the roots, to the rebels, to the children born in the wake of her silence. It belonged to the people who remembered. Abadil's crown rolled from his head. He clawed at it, then at the air, then at himself, laughing, crying, muttering nonsense. His madness unfolded like a flower, fragile, irreversible. Nia looked at him once. Then she turned. She walked through the hall, out the palace, into the world, still silent, still barefoot, still blooming. Behind her, the wind sang louder. And it would never stop. No one saw exactly when Nia left. One day she was walking among them, barefoot and calm, and the next only her echo remained. Some say she disappeared into the high mountains, where the clouds kiss the earth and even eagles dare not nest. Others say she became one with the wind itself, vanishing like mist at dawn. But everyone agrees on one thing. Though her body was gone, her presence had never been stronger. In the days and years that followed her return, the land began to change, not just in soil or sky but in spirit. Rain returned to the fields. Slowly at first like a song being remembered, then steadily, rhythmically like the beat of a drum. Trees once dry to their roots burst into blossom. Rivers that had dwindled began to babble again. And in every corner of the land people listened, not to kings, not to decrees, but to the wind. And it sang. Not constantly, not forcefully, but with intention. On certain nights, a soft gust would pass through a village, weaving between the clay houses, rattling beads hung in doorways, lifting the hems of sleeping mothers' skirts. And with it came the melody, simple, wordless, powerful. People began to build what they called wind altars. They weren't grand or gilded, just small spaces carved from stone or wood, open to the sky where the wind could pass freely. Families left offerings there, carved flutes, feathers, wildflowers, broken instruments, and bits of cloth embroidered with fragments of the forbidden melody. Children were brought to these altars to be blessed. Elders knelt and hummed prayers. Lovers pledged themselves beneath their open roofs, swearing to speak with kindness or not at all. And everywhere they named their daughters Nia. It became one of the most cherished names in the land, meaning not just purpose or song, but something deeper. In the tongue of the griots, Nia came to mean that which cannot be silenced. These daughters grew up hearing the story of the voiceless songbird, not as tragedy but as legacy. Griots told her tale with reverence. Around fire pits under night skies, they sang of the girl whose voice healed the land, who was punished for beauty, who made silence her strength. Her name threaded itself into lullabies sung over newborns. Sleep now, little Nia, let the wind hold you close. Her story echoed in wedding songs. Like the wind she walks, like her you sing, two hearts, one song. Even at funerals her song rose like incense. Do not cry, for the voice is carried, she who leaves walks with the wind. Children asked questions. Did she have wings? Did she talk to animals? Why didn't the king love her voice? The griots answered carefully, always leaving space for wonder. Because some voices are meant not to be owned but to be shared, they said. And some truths must pass through silence to be fully heard. In time her tale became more than memory. It transformed into an origin myth, a seed of belief carried forward through generations. She became the spirit of resistance for the oppressed, the hope of the grieving, the balm for the silenced. Her name was whispered in times of fear and shouted in moments of joy. Where once silence had been forced upon her, Now silence became a space of power, a moment before song, sacred and potent. The king's palace crumbled into ruin. Wild vines overtook its stone walls. No one returned to rule it. No one dared. Instead, the land governed itself through shared stories, whispered promises and wind-borne wisdom. Some claim to have seen her in the mountains, standing on a high ridge, hair fluttering like white flame. Others say she lives in the whispering forest still, appearing only to children or lost travelers. But these sightings are beside the point. Because Nia's legacy is not in sightings or statues. It lives in song. And that song, her song, moves still. In the hush before dawn when mothers rock their babies. In the quiet before rain when farmers lift their heads to the clouds. In the pause before protest, when hearts pound and lips ready themselves to speak. She is the breath in that stillness, the music in that moment. She is the wind that carries us forward. And so the griots say at the end of the tale. May you listen well, child. Not all power shouts. Some power hums. And some power like Nia's sings forever. And so, beneath the great baobab tree where shadows stretch long across the red earth, the griot finishes the tale. His voice lowers to a whisper, more breath than sound, as if to make room for something older than speech. Around him, children sit wide-eyed, their fingers digging unconsciously into the soil, their ears straining to hear more. The fire crackles low, throwing dancing light across the griot's face, lined with years, with songs, with secrets. He leans back on his mat, gazing up at the swaying branches above, their silhouettes etched against a sky now deep in velvet. Now you know, he says, his voice gentle and cracked like the bark of the tree behind him. Now you know why the wind sings in the trees. A hush falls. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird calls once, then falls silent. The only sound is the wind, threading its way through the leaves above, humming softly. A small girl, no older than 6, lifts her hand as if asking permission to speak. The griot nods. Will the wind ever bring her back? She asks, her voice small but sure. The other children turn to look at her, then back to the griot. It is the question they all wanted to ask, but only she dared to voice. The griot's eyes sparkle. Not with mockery. Not with pity. But with something ancient, like memory, like recognition. He leans forward slowly, cupping his hands together as if catching a breath of air. My child, he says, she never left. The children blink. He gestures to the trees, to the sky, to the dirt beneath them. She is in the rain that kisses your crops. She is in the lullaby your mother hums when your tears fall. She is in the shout of joy when a baby walks, and in the silence that follows goodbye. She walks the mountains, yes, but also your veins, your voices, your hearts. The girl stares at the wind above, her lips parted in wonder. And then the wind picks up. Soft at first, like someone exhaling after a long silence. It brushes through the baobab's limbs, stirring the dry leaves to song. The flames of the fire flicker sideways. The children lean into it instinctively as if drawn toward an invisible music. And there it is. A melody, not loud, not obvious, but unmistakable. A thread of sound too wild to be man-made, too perfect to be chance. It weaves through the air like an old friend returning home, carrying a tune that every child knows but cannot name. The hum of something once lost, now found. Not made of words. Just feeling. The griot closes his eyes, smiling faintly. Shoo, he says. Listen. The children sit still, breath held. And the wind sings.